A small Genie snuck up to the city, strung out on lasers and snatched back blazers. Ate all your razors while folding the waiters. Talking about Monroe and walking on Snow White. New York's a joker and everyone tastes right. Poor little Greenie. Sleeps on his bed. Loves chimney's dead. Waiter screams anymore. Let yourself go. Sits like a man, but smiles like a reptile. She loves him just for a short while. She's scratching the sand, won't let go his hand. He says he's a beautician, says you nutrition, keeps all your dead.
Moment is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena, but also there will be a surprise outbreak.
We have not given it, I think, all of the attention that it deserves.
Last May, Johns Hopkins University put together an exercise to simulate what could happen in the next flu pandemic.
This news just in.
Congresswoman Susan Brooks of Indiana, who's co-sponsored legislation to bolster the nation's preparedness for public health emergencies, was part of the exercise.
Every time you do an exercise, you realize where the gaps are. If large numbers of people begin to get sick, actually your economy is impacted, our national security can be impacted. There's so many things that people just don't realize.
In this scenario, a year and a half into the pandemic, the hypothetical Clade X flu had killed 150 million people worldwide. A vaccine was still stuck in development. The U.S. president and vice president were both sickened, as was a third of Congress. The U.S. government nationalized the entire healthcare system to coordinate its response. And all of these were considered realistic projections.
These are the types of things that most citizens don't think about. We don't want to think about them, but yet we expect the systems to be in place to take care of them. We expect the medical community, pharmaceutical community, diagnostic community, everyone to be ready, and that's not how it works.
Influenza is evergreen. It is always with us. Every year we have a seasonal epidemic of influenza, and sometimes we have pandemics. There were 3 in the last century, and we've already had 1 this century. We know there will be more pandemics, and by working to prepare for pandemics of influenza, we can strengthen our preparedness and response to seasonal influenza. And the work that we do for seasonal influenza makes us more protected against pandemics.
Well, there's a lot that CDC is doing to prepare. We break things out into what we call task forces. We have a group that looks at the epidemiology and laboratory, all of that to characterize the virus and determine where it's coming from. We have groups that understand community mitigation, so they come up with guidance on how to have social distancing and to prevent people from coming together to make the virus transmit less. We have a vaccine task force whose job it is to make sure that when the pandemic starts up and we have to have a vaccine available, they're all ready to get it distributed and to monitor the safety, etc. We also have groups that deal with countermeasures, and so they monitor the strategic national stockpile, the antiviral drugs that are available. They work with manufacturers and work with large pharmacy chains. All of that comes together and then gets turned into translated messages that our communications task force actually takes care of as well. So lots of different parts all working together, coming together very quickly so that we could respond as fast as possible.
Over the last week, my administration has taken several precautions to address the challenge posed by the 2009 H1N1 flu virus.
Those precautions included disseminating public health recommendations through a variety of media and developing a candidate vaccine virus in less than 3 weeks. By June, there were 18,000 cases of H1N1 flu in the U.S.
WHO has officially declared us to be in a pandemic.
In July of 2009, scientists and public health experts from across the country came together in a pan-flu summit at NIH to discuss the most effective ways to minimize the impact of the H1N1 flu.
We're aggressively planning for a vaccination program.
The FDA has licensed the H1N1 vaccine from 4 of the 5 manufacturers. The FDA has licensed the H1N1 vaccine from 4 of the 5 manufacturers.
Vade, Jubio, Celerator,
Seven of diamonds. The 7 of diamonds from the 6 to the 7 of diamonds, and the gentleman on the end, 10 of spades. The 10 of spades. There are probably more books written about magic than any other art form. Literally thousands and thousands of books, and I've collected thousands of books in my life about magic technique. But I believe that the real key to learning is personally. It's almost like the sensei-master relationship in the martial arts, that the way you want to learn is by someone that you respect showing you something. There's a level of transmission and a level of appreciation that's never completely attainable just through the written word.
Is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why.
If this H1N1 pandemic influenza virus
had appeared in November or the beginning of December, we would have incorporated it into one of the components of the seasonal flu, and no one would be asking the question. In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations.
Seasons don't fear the reaper, the wind, the sun, or the rain. We can be like they are. Come on, baby, don't fear the reaper. Baby, take my hand, don't fear.
First, the deadly flu and the new and alarming numbers coming in from the CDC tonight. Among the worst flu season in a decade, and it hasn't peaked yet. 39 states now reporting high flu activity. 7 more children lost last week alone. 37 children dying so far this season. But tonight, another age group making news because of how hard this is hitting this year, baby boomers. And what about the caretakers? If you're caring for someone with the flu, should you get Tamiflu as well? Here's ABC's Lindsay Janis tonight.
Tonight, 37-year-old mother Carly Ilg-Slavin from Indiana, one of the flu epidemic's latest victims. Her father says she'd been taking care of her husband and children who had the virus when she started feeling sick.
My wife called and said, "Get over here right away." They put her in ICU. She's in critical condition.
He says she died just 3 days after testing positive for the flu.
We all were there standing around her, and she left about 6:30 in the morning.
Carly's story highlighting the danger to caregivers and others at home. Tonight, the CDC recommending that some people at a higher risk take a preventative dose of Tamiflu, even if they don't have the flu, a step that could cut their chances of getting the virus by up to an estimated 80%.
If there are infections in the household and you're concerned about an older individual in the home, talk with your doctor and see if the prophylactic medicines are something that would be useful.
Across the country, nearly 12,000 flu patients so sick they've had to be hospitalized. The CDC says the number of children reported to have died from the flu this season has climbed to 37. 12-year-old Dylan Winnick's family says he had a fever on Monday and died on Tuesday.
Shocking. You get a call that he's passed. How the hell does that happen?
David, something unique this year. The CDC says hospitalization rates for people between the ages of 50 and 64 are higher than for the very young. It's usually the other way around. The hardest hit group of people still those 65 and older. David?
All right, so seniors, children, and this year the baby boomers too. Lindsay, our thanks to you. And about that point you heard from Lindsay, they're caretakers, caring for loved ones with the flu. Should they be taking Tamiflu as well? Let's dig into this with Dr. Ashton. Jen's here tonight. And Jen, I know that your daughter has the flu at home. We wish her a speedy recovery along with everyone at home dealing with this. But this notion about Tamiflu, you were mentioning that you were on it. Obviously, you're a doctor. It's easier to get. But it's really important for people to consider this at home.
Exactly. And I also treat pregnant women. But in general, the vulnerable high-risk groups that should consider Tamiflu as a prophylactic measure to reduce their risk of getting sick if they've had direct contact. High-risk groups include people over the age of 65, anyone with chronic medical condition like asthma, pregnant women, or anyone with a weakened immune system. Those are the vulnerable groups.
And in the meantime, Jen, we'd heard for years that you have to be on Tamiflu within 48 hours of symptoms, but you've learned something else now.
That's really the old thinking. There was that firm line in the sand about the 48-hour mark. Now there's new data that suggests that even after the first 48 hours of symptoms, antiviral medications like Tamiflu can be helpful. So that should not be a reason to withhold treatment.
Health workers face a huge challenge trying to contain this season's flu outbreak. It is the most widespread in recent years, with at least 37 child deaths reported so far. The biggest clusters are in the South and West. Dr. Anthony Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's part of the effort to fight future outbreaks. He joins us from the headquarters of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Fauci, good morning. Always good to see you.
Good morning.
First, let me ask you this. Why is this year's virus so deadly?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. The type of virus that's dominating this year is what we call an H3N2, the designation of this particular kind of influenza A. It historically is a bad actor. So whenever you have this virus, this type of virus dominating, you generally see a bad season and you generally have more complications, particularly among the vulnerable people in whom complications are more common, such as the elderly, such as individuals with underlying conditions, as well as children from birth to 4 years old. And also, as we know, the vaccine this year, although it's always best to get vaccinated, is not the perfect vaccine. It is not, as we would say, favorably efficacious in the sense that we only don't know right now what the efficaciousness is going to be, but it likely is not going to be much more than around 30%. I say that with some trepidation because I don't want people not to get vaccinated. Every type of protection against the virus with a vaccine is better than no protection at all. So a combination of a vaccine that doesn't work very well and a really bad virus.
So given that combination, Dr. Fauci, what should people do?
Well, the first thing you should do, and again, getting back to vaccination, if you have not been vaccinated, you should get vaccinated. That's for sure. Then if, in fact, you do get infected, if you have what looks like it's going to be a serious infection, don't hesitate to get to a healthcare provider who can get you an anti-influenza antiviral like Tamiflu. This is particularly true for people who fall into the risk categories where complications are common. So if you're an elderly person or you have an underlying disease, you should not wait to get anti-flu medication.
Dr. Fauci, it's been 100 years since that lethal 1918 flu, and you're saying there could be one virus that could be catastrophic.
Baby,
Is there enough, Dr. Schuckett, is there enough vaccine available this year to prevent the flu, or at least prevent it from being more severe? Is there enough of the drug Tamiflu, which I know is prescribed for many people?
More than 152 million doses of influenza vaccine have been distributed, and the coverage is overall about what we saw last year in terms of how many people have gotten vaccinated by this time in the year. It's not too late to be vaccinated. For those who haven't already gotten vaccinated, there may be some benefit to still getting the vaccine.
In today's morning rounds, this flu season is on track to be one of the worst in recent history. In terms of the number of people infected, flu is now widespread in almost every single state, and nearly 10 million people have become ill so far. 4,800 of those people have died. Pediatric deaths are double what they were this time last year, and Dr. Tara Narula is here to help us understand why. So 32 children have died so far from the flu this year. Why is it up so much?
So it's interesting. This year, the word we use about the flu is unpredictable. And it's been.
Tonight, we begin a special series about the threat from influenza. Every year, the seasonal flu emerges and kills tens of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands globally. But there's an even graver concern. Public health officials fear the emergence of a new, previously unknown flu virus that could be far more lethal and become a pandemic by spreading across the world. As William Brangham reports, it's happened before.
The heart and
the heart and my heartbeat, yeah, because of course I didn't have a beating heart for a little bit.
6 years ago, Autumn Redinger started feeling sick, but she was a 33-year-old mom, really healthy, and so she didn't think much of it.
It was 2 days after Christmas, and I just kind of felt a little junky, a little cough here and there, but nothing horrible. I had texted my fiance, and it was a big jumbled mess, and that's when he pretty much...
The words you texted
Yes,
didn't make sense.
They didn't make sense. Honestly, I don't even remember him coming to pick me up.
Redinger was rushed to her local hospital in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, where doctors diagnosed her with the flu.
My lungs started to feel on fire.
Meaning when you would breathe in, it would burn?
Breathe in, breathe out, it burned.
The flu was attacking her lungs and filling them with fluid. She was then medevaced to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where she was eventually put under the care of Dr. Holt Murray.
The lungs become very boggy, they fill with water, and you're not able to move oxygen from the outside world into your bloodstream.
You can't breathe.
You can't breathe, yeah.
It kept getting worse. Her lungs were failing. She was put on a ventilator, but even that couldn't get enough oxygen into her.
It was a nurse who slipped up and made a comment about me dying. And I was just like, what? Oh yeah, you died like twice. You were on a machine to keep you alive. And I'm like...
That machine, called an ECMO, took out her dark, depleted blood, pumped it full of oxygen, and fed it back into her body.
It runs through the pump in the oxygenator and comes out cherry red.
That is a very intensive intervention to try to save someone's life.
It's as intensive as it gets. We're taking 5 liters of blood a minute, taking it out of the body and returning it.
It went way, 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 way up.
Days like that are what keep Dr. Anthony Fauci up at night.
In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations. You do that every year for 20, 30, 40 years.
That's a huge toll.
At the end of that time, that's a huge toll in illness and in deaths.
Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. He says while many take the so-called seasonal flu for granted, it still kills tens of thousands in the U.S. every year.
So this is the influenza virus. This is the inner core of the influenza virus.
But the seasonal flu isn't really what Fauci loses sleep over. It's the concern that a new flu strain emerges, a virus we've never seen before and have no protections against, like what happened in 1918.
In 1918, we were swimming in the dark, as it were.
That year, a new virus emerged, triggering one of the worst pandemics in human history. Often called the Spanish flu, this virus killed at least 50 million people worldwide and reached almost every nation on Earth. About 675,000 people died in the U.S. alone.
So you had this disease that was spread very quickly across the world that was killing millions of people, and yet people didn't know what it was that was killing them.
Dr. Jeremy Brown directs the Office of Emergency Care Research at the National Institutes of Health, and he wrote the book Influenza, the 100-Year Hunt to Cure the Deadliest Disease in History. Brown says not only did doctors not understand this was a virus sickening people, but they had no antibiotics to treat the secondary deadly pneumonia that often accompanies flu. The treatments they did have often made things worse.
So you had bloodletting, you had enemas. Everybody seemed to get an enema back then.
Exactly at the moment when you're incredibly dehydrated because of the pneumonia.
And then whiskey and champagne.
All this led to a higher than normal death rate among 20 to 40-year-olds, the people typically much less susceptible to flu. More soldiers were killed by 1918's flu than died in battle during World War I.
Asian influenza spreads rapidly.
Since 1918, the world has seen 3 flu pandemics. Thankfully, none has been as deadly as the first. There was the 1957 Asian flu, 11 years later, the Hong Kong flu, and most recently, the 2009 swine flu.
It wasn't particularly virulent, so that the number of deaths in 2009 among the general population was even less than a regular seasonal flu, even though there were many, many more infections.
The concern, of course, is that the next pandemic would be both contagious and deadly. That's what has public health officials worried today.
If or when a new virus emerges, it will be researchers here at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta who will try to spot it and identify it as quickly as possible.
It's not an earthquake or a hurricane with just one geography affected. The whole world is vulnerable.
When a new strain emerges, it's up to Dr. Ann Shukat and her colleagues to help identify the virus, monitor its spread, and help coordinate treatment of the sick. She's the principal deputy director of the CDC.
You don't want to have a plan that assumes things are going like this when your early observations point in another direction. So the better the working relationships are, the more quickly you can adapt, the more nimble the response.
Shukat stresses the importance of early detection. Even 2 weeks can make an immense difference in vaccine development and saving lives.
We know we will have more pandemics of influenza. It's not if, it's when.
You're confident of that?
Absolutely. The probability of a pandemic tomorrow is the same as it was in 2009. So we can't be complacent about our state of preparedness, but we can't assume that the next pandemic will be like the last ones. We have to work through the different scenarios.
And the CDC are not the only ones gaming out those scenarios.
We have not given it, I think, all of the attention that it deserves.
Last May, Johns Hopkins University put together an exercise to simulate what could happen in the next flu pandemic.
This news just in.
Congresswoman Susan Brooks of Indiana, who's co-sponsored legislation to bolster the nation's preparedness for public health emergencies, was part of the exercise.
Every time you do an exercise, you realize where the gaps are. If large numbers of people begin to get sick, actually, your economy is impacted, our national security can be impacted. There's so many things that people just don't realize.
In this scenario, a year and a half into the pandemic, the hypothetical Clade X flu had killed 150 million people worldwide. A vaccine was still stuck in development. The U.S. president and vice president were both sickened, as was a third of Congress. The U.S. government nationalized the entire healthcare system to coordinate its response. And all of these were considered realistic projections.
These are the types of things that most citizens don't think about. We don't want to think about them, but yet we expect the systems to be in place to take care of them. We expect the medical community, pharmaceutical community, diagnostic community, everyone to be ready, and that's not how it works.
Depending on how we lay it in the Jeep, I'm not sure if we can all go. Is anybody listening to me? Yes.
Years later, much of Autumn Redinger's experience is still a mystery.
You have no idea how you got the flu.
No idea. No clue. No idea.
She carries a few lingering traces of her brush with influenza, some scars, and a few side effects.
I just kept telling myself, it's okay. You're a miracle. You're alive. Yeah, your toes might not bend. Yeah, your lungs act a little funny. Yeah, your memory's shot. You have a few scars, but you're alive. It might rain tomorrow.
Her case remains a striking reminder of just how serious this virus can be. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
Take a look. You see all that red? I mean, how could you not? That should be a red flag about just how bad this year's flu season has gotten. The CDC says influenza is widespread in all but 2 states and Washington, D.C. It's that map, that rampant spreading virus we should be worried about. Let's bring the focus back to where health officials here say it should be, the flu.
Flu season now. It is back and it's off to a deadly start. The CDC reporting elevated levels of the illness with an estimated 2.6 million cases, 23,000 people sent to the hospital, 1,300 deaths so far. Dr. Jen is here to tell us what we need to know and how we can stay healthy. Good morning.
Good morning again, Dan.
What's the latest here?
Well, the weekly flu report is out from the CDC. Take a look at the map. What you can see now is widespread flu activity in 23 states. I want to be clear, when you see a map like this, brown, yellow, orange, and you hear the word widespread, that refers to geography. If you see the pretty map with a lot of red, it's very dramatic, red, yellow, green, that refers to flu-like activity and the severity of how bad people are going to see their doctors. So very different terminology, very important distinction.
Gotcha. One of the things people always wonder, how effective is this year's flu vaccine?
Look, the flu vaccine is at best only moderately effective. We don't know yet. We'll only know about this year when it's in our rear view mirror. What we do know is that year to year, the vaccine hovers around 40% effective.
The failure to prepare could allow the next epidemic to be dramatically more devastating than Ebola. So next time we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system.
Cards are like living, breathing human beings. I suppose because they give you real pleasure. You sit in a room with them for 10 or 15 hours a day, and they become your friends, particularly very lonely people.
About 80,000 deaths.
the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malcolm, but I think things are a little bit different than you and I had feared.
Yeah, I know. They're a lot worse.
Now, wait a second. Now, we haven't even seen the part where Amy...
Don't let him talk. There's no reason. No, I want to hear every viewpoint. I really do.
Yeah, don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
Ask Dr. Taubenberger why he studies 1918 influenza.
You know, I think that a lot of people assume that studying the 1918 flu is just sort of a question of historical curiosity, you know, that we're just scholars and we're just interested in some remote thing that happened 100 years ago and it doesn't really have any impact on the current time or the present. And certainly studying what happened in 1918 is of immense importance from a historical and a sociological standpoint. A pandemic of this magnitude that impacted everything on Earth certainly affected all field of human endeavor, and it's worth studying. But for me, as a physician, the important thing is what can we learn about what happened in the past to try to apply that knowledge to how can we prevent something like this from ever happening again. So that's really what drives me. I guess many people who have asked me questions about it also assume that after 20 years of working on this and having the sequence of the virus for over a dozen years, that we should have all the answers by now. You know, why is it that there's no simple answer? How come I can't just point my finger to one mutation on one of the genes of the virus and say, aha, this is why it was such a killer flu? And the answer is that biology is just really amazingly complex, and it's really humbling that so much work and so much scholarship over 100 years by so many people, laboratories and epidemiologists and others, still have not answered all the questions. And it's, in a sense, disheartening, but also it's the same thing that drives me every day. A virus that only has 10 genes with only 13,000 bases can cause so much disaster to humans. Here we have a genome with 3 billion bases and we make 50,000 genes. And this simple little virus, we still don't actually understand how it works. We don't understand what all the proteins do. We don't understand how they interact with each other and interact with host cells. We don't understand even the simplest questions of how the virus is packaged and transmitted. And it's, in one time, very frustrating, but it's also, you know, motivating for me and many other people to want to get in the lab and tackle this problem every single day to try to help public health.
1718, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations.
My experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why.
The wind, the sun, or the rain.